Hey first grade friends, welcome back to our writing workshop. I just want to review a little bit before we move forward. Let's review what we've talked about so far in our writing workshop unit. So we started by talking about how important characters are, and we have to think of a make-believe character with a real problem. So remember, this is a fiction story, but it's realistic fiction. So it's a fiction made-up character, but a real problem, something that could really happen. And we think of a problem, so we have trouble in our story. And then last time we talked about how can we be independent? How can we do our writing by ourselves? And I was very impressed with all the writing that I saw. Well, today we're going to talk about how writers learn to get their characters out of trouble. So that's our topic for today. But before we start that, I just want to share with you a little story that I have for you. So here we go. Sarah and Julie were walking to school. It was Julie's first day of kindergarten. Her big sister Sarah was going to keep her safe on their way to school. "Bye," they shouted as they left the house. "This is great," Julie said as they walked down the block. The sun was shining, the flowers were out. They turned the corner. And that's when they saw it. They saw the end. Wouldn't it be mean if I ended the story right there, readers? If I just said they saw the end? You would want to know what happens next, right? But I didn't let you know what happened next. Writers, today I want to teach you that readers love satisfying endings. One way writers create satisfying endings for their readers is by telling what happens to their characters at the end of the story. This makes their readers very happy. So I'm finishing up a Gretchen story right now. I've been working on it for a while, and I want to share with you the way that the story ends. Now, this is already in a booklet, and I've already thought it was done and ready to go, and then I thought, I wonder if my students will think that the ending is satisfying to a reader. So I'm going to read it to you, and then you're going to have to let me know if you think that it's satisfying or not. So since you can't actually communicate with me and let me know, I just want you to think about it in your head. So here we go. So this is the ending that I have. Did it seem like I fixed the trouble? As a reader, are you satisfied with how it ended? The way that story ended didn't really seem so good after I read it again and again. Maybe it's because Gretchen was still stuck in the tree fort. So I should try to get my character out of the trouble. I need to make sure that I fix the problem that she's in. So watch me as I revised my writing. Now, just so you know, even though my story is finished, I can still go back and think about, how can I change the ending? So this is what I came up with. Gretchen hid her head in her hands. Crack! She was cold. Then the storm passed. Gretchen's mom yelled, "Gretchen, come inside and get dry. I made hot chocolate." Gretchen climbed down the treehouse. She felt safe at last. So do you feel better now that you know that Gretchen was safe in her house and safe at home? It's because now something happens at the end to my character. Writers, you can make your readers happy too by getting your character out of trouble. So I just want us to think about this for just a minute. I want us to think, how can we do this in your stories? How can you do this in your stories? So I'm going to give you a few tips on how we can do this. When we did our small moment stories back way at the beginning of the year, we talked about how we can bring our stories to life. Now that's very important. But first, we have to write a solution. So we have to get your character out of trouble first. That's tip number 1 that I have for you. You write a solution to get your character out of trouble. Tip number 2. Use everything you learned during our Small Moments unit about bringing our stories to life. You can add action by telling what the characters did. So in my story, we talked about how Gretchen, she was shivering and she felt cold, and then the storm passed and her mom yelled, and then Gretchen climbed down from the tree. So we added action. We can add dialogue by telling what the characters said. So we did that by having her mom yell. Or we can have feelings by telling how the character felt. So at the very end, I said, she felt safe at last. So that's how I want you guys to do this in your story. The most important things are action, dialogue, and feelings. Now, even though I just gave you a few hints, let's think about how I did this specifically in my story. So fiction writers get their character out of trouble. Gretchen hid her head in her hands. Crack! She was wet and cold, and then the storm passed. So it told what the character did. It was her actions. She hid her head in her hands. She was wet and cold, and then the storm passed. Gretchen's mom yelled, Gretchen, come inside and get dry. I made hot chocolate. So that's dialogue. That's what another character said. And then we have what the character, her actions, and we have feelings. So Gretchen climbed down the treehouse. So that was another action that we saw. And she felt safe at last. So we see some feelings. So those are 3 very important things that I want you guys to do when you are all doing your writing. So let's review what we've talked about today. You learned that writers can go back into their stories and work on their endings. So like I said at the beginning, my booklet was done and I thought I was ready to say, okay, I'll put that one down and start a new one. But then the more and more that I thought about the ending, I realized that it needed to be fixed. So writers can always go back to their stories and work on their endings. One way they can work on their endings is to get their characters out of trouble. So most of you or all of you should have thought of a problem that your character was in. So it's very important that you get your characters out of trouble. So you want them to solve the problem. Think of a solution. A special tip you learned was if you use dialogue or actions or feelings, it helps you stretch out your ending. So if you talk about what characters said, what they did, and how they felt, you'll create a great ending that really makes your readers satisfied. What's important is that you know you can go back into your stories and elaborate on them, even when you thought you were done. So like I said, even though I thought I was done, the more I thought about that ending, I knew that something needed to be fixed. So it is important the step you're taking today, which is to think about making your reader as happy as you can when you write. That means you want to make sure you have an ending that satisfies your reader. You can do this in the story you're working on now, or you can look back and revise some of your endings to a story that you might have finished. So whenever you're writing, you can add on and make it better. So I'm so proud of all your hard work, and I can't wait to read your stories. That's all for today. Bye, guys.